Howdy and welcome to Chapter 3. Last week we talked about how organizations identify problems and conduct needs assessments to discover whether there's a gap between the current situation and the ideal situation. As part of the semester-long project, you conducted a needs assessment and found a gap that could be addressed through systematic instructional design, for which you're going to create an online tutorial. You then created a goal for your instruction. The goal should have been a clear statement of what learners will be able to do after they take your online tutorial. Chapter 3 takes that goal and breaks it down into the steps that learners need to do, and this is called goal analysis. The learning objectives for Chapter 3 include two major steps. The first is to classify instructional goals into domains, and we'll talk about what that means. Also to perform a goal analysis to identify the major steps required to accomplish an instructional goal. So what is instructional analysis? So let's take a look at that. Okay, so instructional analysis is a set of procedures that, when applied to an instructional goal, identifies the relevant steps for performing the goal and the subordinate skills required for a learner to achieve the goal. So for this part, this week, we're only going to be looking at breaking down the goal. Next week, we're going to look at subordinate skills and entry skills needed. So the first thing we want to do is classify the goal. Okay, we talked a little bit about this last week as far as Gagne's learning domains. Okay, so we classify the goal. It's one of four areas. Okay, it could be verbal information. Okay, and verbal information is asking the learner to give a specific response to a specific question, such as having a learner name the countries in Africa, for instance. The next skill is intellectual. Okay, intellectual skills are those that involve problem solving. Okay, so problem solving, and this is solving some kind of a unique task using cognitive ability. Okay, so it's the use of cognitive ability to solve some kind of problem. So it could be making discriminations between things, classifying things, forming concepts, applying rules, or solving problems that are well-structured or ill-structured. Okay, so various levels of intellectual skills. The next category is psychomotor, and this is a combination of mental and physical activity. So it involves coordination between mental and physical activity, such as teaching someone how to hit a baseball. Okay, that would be a psychomotor activity because you have to think a lot about it, but it's also very physical. The fourth category that your goal may be is an attitude. Okay, so attitudes are things that we want learners to do or to not do, such as eating healthier or not smoking or having a certain attitude toward bullying. Okay, these would all be attitudes. For instructional designers, probably where most of ours fall are going to be right here in intellectual and problem solving. Okay, these are the most common ones. After we identify the domain of the goal and classify it, it's necessary to be more specific in indicating what the learner will be doing when performing the goal. Okay, and there's a couple ways to do this, and the book has some great examples. But if we look at intellectual or psychomotor goals. So it depends what your goal is classified as far as how you map it out. If we consider intellectual psychomotor, this is where we want to describe in a step-by-step fashion exactly what a person would be doing when performing the goal. Okay, and we want to do this in steps. So here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Okay, so this is what a person would do if I were mapping out how to hit a baseball. Okay, I would go step by step through that process. Okay, sometimes we have a decision involved. So we may have step 1, then we may have a step 2, and then we may have a point where we have to ask a question, yes or no. Normally we use a diamond for that. So we'd use a diamond where we would say, if yes, then you go down that path. If no, you go down this path. And then we would figure out the steps for yes and the steps for no. Okay. Typically, we have 5 to 15, I'll write that up here, 5 to 15 steps per goal. Okay, and it's important that you have somewhere in here. You don't want to have too few or you won't have enough training to do. You don't want to have too many or you'll be overwhelmed with what you're doing. So if you have less than 5 or more than 15, you need to revise it. And the book explains a little bit how to do that. So watch the 2 videos that follow for some examples. Keep in mind that this week we're just doing the goal, the first level of the goal mapping. Next week we're going to talk about the subordinate and entry skills. So kind of, look at it for information, but this week we're just mapping out that first layer of the 5 to 15 steps.
Instructional Analysis Part 1. In this short video presentation, I'm going to show you how you can do an instructional analysis. Now, I'm going to take a little bit different approach here for this presentation, because when you do an instructional analysis, you don't want to think of it as some kind of a perfect science or something that you can do exactly right, because really there's no perfect way of doing this. It's not like math where there's an exact right answer. You want to make sure that you're thinking about this as a design tool, okay? And when we design things, usually it's iterative, meaning it takes several attempts to do it. And also, it takes a lot of thinking, and there's no right answer to solve design problems, and no right process for solving design problems. Let's go ahead then and take a look at the general pieces of an instructional analysis. Okay, so what are the parts of an instructional analysis? Well, first at the top here is the instructional goal. So far in our course in IDPT 610, you've already created your instructional goal. So your next step is to do the instructional goal analysis, and this is where you analyze your goal to break it down into the sequence of activities or operations and decisions that are required to actually achieve that goal. So you sort of break it down into steps, big steps. Now, to go along with that is our next component, subordinate skills. So for each of those steps or components that we identified in the instructional analysis, there are usually skills, subordinate skills, or supporting skills that the learners need to learn to be able to accomplish the instructional goal and accomplish the steps in the goal analysis. So these are things we have to spell out. And then finally we have our entry skills. These are things that we assume that the learner already knows how to do. So let's take a look at how this will be visually displayed in your piece of instruction. So the top of your layout, you'll have your instructional goal, and that's usually placed inside a box like this. And you break down your goal with your instructional goal analysis. And you can just sort of represent each of these steps visually like this, with these 4 boxes going across. Again, for each of those goals, you may have subordinate skills that the learner needs to learn to be able to do those steps. So you can represent them in this way. And then finally, below this dotted line here are the entry skills, and these are things that a learner must have already mastered before they come to the training or use your instruction. So you can represent it in this way. Now this is a very general description or general layout of how this will work, so I thought it would be worth showing you an example first of a psychomotor skill. So here's our instructional goal. Team members will kick a soccer ball 20 feet with their dominant foot using soccer cleats. Let's try now to break this down using an instructional goal analysis. Now remember, it's not a perfect science. This is an iterative approach, and so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my pen here and just write it out visually just to give it a first try. And I recommend that you do the same thing. It's going to take several iterations, several attempts to be able to do this. So the first thing that I think that the learner needs to be able to do is, and again, I'm just making this up as I go. This is my first try. I'm going to say they need to stand. They need to be able to stand in the ready stance. So they need to be able to stand and be prepared to do their kicking. So that's our first step. So perhaps after they stand in their ready stance, they need to position their lead foot. You know, you have 2 feet. One's the kicking foot, the other one's the lead foot, we'll call it. I'm not sure if that's what they actually call it, but that's what I'll call it. So position the lead foot. So after they position the lead foot, they probably need to lean their body forward. They've got to lean their body forward, get the momentum going so that when they actually kick, it'll actually move the ball 20 feet. Okay, I think the next step then is to kick the ball with the kick foot. All right, and then the last thing will be to have your leg follow through. Let's try that. And I'm going to say it's the kick leg follow through because you want the kick leg to follow through. Okay. All right, so those are our steps. Looks like we have 5 major steps for doing this psychomotor skill, kicking the ball. Now, once again, I just sort of brainstormed that out just now. It's not perfect yet, but I think it's a good start. So if I wanted to really get in there and find out what those steps are, there's a lot of things I could do. I could go and look online to try to see what steps people are recommending on the how-to things that are online, or I could watch some videos, or I could go watch a soccer player kick a ball, or go watch a coach coaching soccer players on how to kick the ball. There's lots of different things that you can do to do this goal analysis. And the point is to be iterative. Show it to somebody else, get their feedback, get their ideas on how to improve it, continually improve it so that you can get to the point where you really feel like you've got it. Now let's play around for a minute with the subordinate skills analysis. And I know you don't need to do this until the next week, but it's worth going ahead with this example to show how it works. What are some of the things that these learners, these team members need to be able to do some of these steps? And I probably won't have space on the slide here to be able to show all of these, but let's talk about this. So stand in the ready stance. Let's talk about the subordinate skills for standing in the ready stance. So my assumption for this is that there are several different things they need to do to be in the ready stance. One of them is that they need to stand on the balls of their feet. So this is like standing on their toes kind of so that they're ready to go. Another thing is they need to have their hands at their thighs, we'll say. Okay, so I think those are some good subordinate skills for standing in the ready stance. Let's see, what's another one? Well, what about positioning the lead foot? One thing they need to know, they need to determine the lead foot. If they don't know which foot they're going to kick with, then it's going to be a problem. So and in our instruction up here we said they're going to kick with their dominant foot. So we really need to sort of have them figure out, are they left-handed? Well, maybe they might kick with their left foot, or right-handed with their right foot. So they need to determine that lead foot. You know, we could go ahead and break these down even further, these subordinate skills, but we'll stop there. So these are things that they still need to learn how to do, but that they don't yet know how to do. Now, there are some skills that they already have that they need to know how to do before they come to the training. So I'm going to write my dotted line here to differentiate between the subordinate skills and the entry skills. Okay, so for standing on the balls of your feet, well, what do they need to be able to do that? So we are going to assume, I'm going to say, okay, we assume that these team members can stand. Maybe stand without falling. Stand without falling. So that's an entry skill they just really need to have. Determining their lead foot. Well, maybe they need to be able to distinguish right from left. And maybe not, maybe that's not part of it, but it seems like that could work as an entry skill. They need to know left from right. So you can see that I could continue to work through all of these for each one of these different components and come up with subordinate skills and entry skills that the learners would need to be able to do to be able to finish the steps in the instructional goal and actually complete the instructional goal effectively. Again, this is part one of how to do an instructional analysis. In the next video, I'll show how I would do it for an intellectual skill. Instructional analysis part 2. In this presentation, I'll show an example of how I would begin to brainstorm and lay out an analysis of an intellectual skill. And in the previous presentation, we looked at a psychomotor skill. So here is the example we'll be going with. Customer service representatives will employ the service call strategy on a customer service phone call. So remember what the components of our analysis are going to be here. We've got the instructional goal. This is already here. We've got it. But we also want to do our goal analysis, our subordinate skill analysis, and our entry skills. So let's start looking at the instructional goal analysis. And remember, once again, this is not a perfect science. I'm just sort of making this up and brainstorming what I think would be good for this. Again, as you do this, it'll be iterative. It'll take several attempts, several drafts before you feel like you're really getting to where you want to be. So let's go ahead here. So I'm going to say for our instructional goal of the reps using the service call strategy, let's start out here and we'll say that they need to answer the call using the call opening. So that's our first step. Now once they've done that, they really need to do, I think what they should do is discover the needs. So discover the needs of the customer. That's really an important step. So after they figure out what the needs of the customer are, the next step then is they have got to make a decision. So they need to discover whether or not they can fulfill the need of the customer. So I'm going to say, can you fulfill the need? That's our yes or no decision here. So if no, then they probably need to transfer the call to somebody who can actually help the customer. But if they can, if it's a yes, then we can say answer their question. Okay? Now, once they answer the question, a next step is to go ahead and close the call. That's our final step. So this is my draft of our instructional goal analysis. Now even now as I look at this, it's not perfect because can you fulfill the needs? If it's a no, maybe they would need to transfer the call, but they might need to also just tell them, hey, we don't have that information, or hey, I can't do that request for you. So that might not work. And sometimes answering the question is not the only thing you need to do. Maybe there's some other action that needs to be taken. So I can already tell that this isn't a perfect instructional goal analysis, but it's a start. So what would I do next? Well, I might just redo this. I might go ahead and adjust it and change it. I might show it to somebody else and say, okay, what am I missing here? Let's sort of fix this up. I really want to just give it several iterations until I feel like I'm getting close to what I need. But this is my start. Okay, so let's do a subordinate skills analysis for this instructional goal now. I'll just do a few of these. So let's talk about discovering the needs. What are some of the subordinate skills that are required for discovering a customer's needs? Well, one thing I'm going to say here is asking quality questions so you understand what their needs are. The next thing that you could do then is also verify understanding. And you want to do that before you start to answer their questions so that you can make sure you're answering the right question. So verify understanding. Let's see, what else could we look at here? Answering the question. That might have a few different subordinate skills. So one of them might be just accessing the information. Another might be use the correct script. Maybe there's some kind of a script that you use when you answer certain types of questions or something. And that's part of the call strategy that we talked about above. Okay, so you start to break it down into these different subordinate skills. A sub-subordinate skill, though, for these might be that you have to use the appropriate job aid. Okay, so that's one of our subordinate skills here. So if you're going to use the correct script, you have to use the job aid. And maybe when you answer the call with your call opening, you're using the job aid to use the proper opening. And even when you're closing the call, you might do the same thing. So this job aid might be a big part of doing all these steps. But remember, This is just my first draft. It's a first try. It's not perfect. And you can continue to revise and refine this. One of the major aspects of good instructional design is revising and improving, getting feedback and improving, reanalyzing it yourself and saying, what else can I do here? So our last thing is entry skills. And let's just do one here. So asking quality questions. So maybe they need to be able to determine what is a question. Now that's way down there on the entry skills, but hey, if you don't know what a question is, you can't really ask quality questions. So accessing information on the database over here on the right, well, an entry skill for that would be able to use a mouse and computer. So you can see how these entry skills, they're things we assume they already know, but things that they would need to be able to do to learn the subordinate skills. We'll teach them the subordinate skills in the training. We'll teach them the steps in the instructional goal analysis so that they can achieve the major goal. So this is how I would start out doing this instructional analysis. Once again, it's not perfect, but it gives you a start to start thinking about it, and then you can refine it and improve it before you create your final product.